I'm the national coordinator of the National Educational Association of Disabled Students. And I'd like to welcome you today to this NEADS community engagement meeting. And we are very fortunate to have Tim Rose, who's the Senior Manager of Inclusion and Diversity at CIBC. And he'll be talking about the MaRS-CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge. What I'd like to do before I introduce Tim is just provide a little bit of a land acknowledgement here with respect to our position as a national organization. The National Educational Association of Disabled Students NEADS acknowledges the homelands of the Indigenous peoples of this place we now call Canada, and honors the many territorial and region keepers of the treaty and unceded territory lands on which NEADS serves as a national human rights organization of people with disabilities working for an inclusive and accessible Canada. And so today we're going to welcome Tim Rose, Senior Manager Inclusion and Diversity CIBC. And Tim will be talking about the MaRS-CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge, which is a very exciting initiative. And I'd like to just say a few words about Tim. I mean, I've known Tim for a number of years now. Tim used to be the coordinator of the Carleton Disability Awareness Center when he was a student at Carleton. I met him there. Tim is a change maker and a business leader who was lucky enough to be born with a significant physical disability. And as he says, he was raised to push the envelope. And over the course of his formative years, Tim has managed to achieve a Master's of Law in Human Rights with a focus on international disability policy, and has spoken at conferences from the US to the UK. From his early days as a university student activist, and I just mentioned that he was the coordinator of the Carleton Disability Awareness Center, Tim has never been one to shy away from a tricky situation. So he is now working with CIBC, and he is really made a difference within the bank, and I think his background with both the nonprofit sector and the private sector gives and his educational experience and disability experience gives Tim unique perspectives, and we're very thrilled to invite him to our event today. So I'd ask Tim to take it away now. And Tim, you let me know when you would like me to start your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Frank. And thank you so much, everyone, and NEADS for having me. I'll just say to start that not only have Frank and I known each other for many, many years, but we used to share an office.
That's
so
right.
I'd like to first apologize for all my smelly sandwiches that I used to eat, Frank, in the office all those years ago. But it's so great to be back with NEADS. I was a proud member of the NEADS network when I was at Carleton. And so it's so great to be able to come back and share this amazing opportunity that CIBC is working on with MaRS. And I have one of my colleagues, Katie from MaRS, in the audience with me here today. And so we're really excited to bring this opportunity to the NEADS network. So Frank, if you want to just go ahead and start my slide presentation there. Frank has graciously agreed to drive my slides for me so that I can just focus on talking. So as Frank mentioned, I'm going to spend most of today talking about the MaRS and CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge, which launched on May 20th, which is Global Accessibility Awareness Day a few weeks ago. And we're really excited about this from a community perspective and from a disability perspective to challenge kind of the way that disability and employment has been tackled by a lot of different organizations in the past. And so I'll get into all of that in a little bit. Frank, if you want to go to the next slide. There we go. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of who am I, and I'm including that photo because it's my new headshot and it looks good. So I, as Frank mentioned, I'm a Carleton grad. I graduated with a undergraduate degree in human rights and law, and then I went to England to do my master's degree at the University of Nottingham in a master's of law and human rights with a focus on international disability rights. And so, but more important than that for me, I'm a proud member of the disability community. I was lucky enough to be born with cerebral palsy, spastic quadriplegia. I've lived with my disability my whole life. And I always tell people it is the best thing about me. It has given me the skills and the talents I need to excel not only in my career but in my personal life. And when I think about 95% of the good things happen in my life, or the skills that I have, the skills that I bring to work every day, they're largely traced back to my disability. And just to give one very quick example of that, a lot of people tell me that I'm a strong verbal presenter, and I say the reason is that growing up doing class group projects in elementary and high school, I was never going to be the one gluing stuff together. So I was always nominated to be the one presenting. I was always nominated to be the mouthpiece for the group because I couldn't do a lot of the physical stuff, right? So when I think about all the skills that I have and that I consider myself, and hopefully others consider me to be strong in, most of them are directly related to my disability, and I'm very proud of that. And so I've been with CIBC now for a little under 4 years. It'll be 4 years in June. And, it is June. Wait, it has been 4 years. I just realized that. Okay. Yeah, I've been with CIBC for that length of time. And really, my journey to get to CIBC was a challenging one. When I graduated with my master's degree, I was quite sure that I was going to come home to Canada and land a job immediately, right? I had excelled in everything. I had a master's degree from a global top 30 university, and that's not what I experienced. And what I instead experienced was 4 years of unemployment, living on ODSP. For those who live in Ontario, that's the Ontario Disability Support Program, and really struggling to find my way. And I went into a mild depression, and I'm very open about that during that period. And so I really started to doubt myself and my abilities. And it wasn't until I kind of changed the way that I thought about disability employment and said, let me bring, what I know are my strong skills out into the workforce and change people's minds about disability. And that's kind of how I eventually landed a role at CIBC. I was lucky enough to have a fantastic career mentor here who saw me. I was doing some work that was sponsored by CIBC and saw me and said, what would it take for you to come and join us here at the bank? And I believe my exact words were not very much. And I've been fortunate enough since then to be a team member here on a number of great teams and really helping to shape the bank's approach to accessibility internally. And that's a big job and often has frustrations. And the last thing I'll say is I worked in the nonprofit sector, both volunteer and paid for a number of years. And I feel more like a change maker here at CIBC than I ever did working in the nonprofit sector. And that's not anything against that sector, but it's about the fact that here at CIBC, there's a lot more opportunities to push for change. And I think that's really exciting. And that is really where the MaRS-CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge comes from. So if you go to the next slide, Frank. So what is the MaRS-CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge? So essentially, when I came on to the inclusion and diversity team here at CIBC, we knew that we wanted to focus on disability and employment. to support the community. We wanted, CIBC was committed to supporting the disability community, but didn't quite know how they were going to do it. And that's why they brought me onto the team, because of my lived experience and background. And I said, if we're going to do this, let's do it in a different way. What I didn't want to have happen is we're giving the same checks to the same organizations who, yes, do great work, but I'm sure we can all agree on this call. The numbers aren't moving fast enough, right? People with disabilities are still experiencing a lot higher unemployment and a lot more barriers to employment, barriers to career advancement. So I really pushed the team and was lucky enough to have leaders who supported me in doing this, to think about the project in an innovative way and to think about the problem in an innovative way. And what can we do to bring something new to this space? So we started looking around, and we were very lucky to find an incredible partner in MaRS, which is a research hub based here in Toronto. And they have one of the tactics that they use in connecting to the innovation community is innovation challenges. So essentially, these are a series of crowdsourced challenges where we put a problem out to the community and we say, come forward with your solutions to that particular problem. And so this is what we wanted to do for disability employment, right? We wanted to create a series of challenges through this project that tackle barriers to employment for people with disabilities in really innovative ways. And particularly, and this was, the project started in what I'll call the before times or pre-COVID times, but particularly in light of COVID-19, with the amount that the way we work is shifting and the way that kind of people's perceptions of what is normal or what was normal is shifting, there's a really unique opportunity for us here to highlight the amazing assets that people with disabilities bring to the workforce. And that's what I truly believe disability is. As I mentioned right off the top, all of the assets that I bring to work, most of them, if not all of them, are influenced by my disability. And so this slide really just provides a timeline of the challenge. And the first, so this is a 4-year program, and we just launched the first challenge in May with a virtual event on May 20th. And really the goals here are to generate dialogue on disability employment, strengthen our relationships with partners in the disability community, and we want to bring the disability and innovation communities together with a focus on solutions, right? And then most importantly for me, invest in the next generation of leaders and change makers. One of the things that I'll always take away from Carleton is the individuals that I met there who were maybe a few years older than me in the disability community and showed me the way, right? And I think it's now incumbent on my generation to do that for the next generation. And so we really want this to be something that has a lasting impact. So if we go to the next slide, oh, and I should have mentioned off the top, I will be taking questions at the end. So where did this all start? So we started by saying, okay, let's frame the problem. So we started by putting together a research report that we went out to the disability community. We conducted a number of interviews with members of the disability community as well as subject matter experts. And the MaRS team led the creation of this fantastic research report, which is available online, and you can find it on the MaRS website, and to identify what is the problem. And then out of that, we said, all right, let's put out a call for ideas, right? So what are the ideas of some of the barriers that people are experiencing? And we were very lucky to get a number of submissions to that process. I believe the total number of submissions we got was 58, which was fantastic, of people saying this is a barrier that I've experienced or my family member has experienced. And then out of that, we said, okay, how do we take those barriers and then narrow them down into things that make sense for a challenge, or for a series of innovation challenges? And what are the kind of touch points where we can have the highest impact in terms of solutions from the community? So if we go to the next slide. So here's kind of the sequence of challenges and what we landed on based on those discussions. So the first challenge, which is highlighted in red, not because it's dangerous, but because it's the one we're currently in. So the first challenge we wanted to frame around access to work. So accessible career entry, barriers in the recruitment process. And my manager at CIBC, Brent Chamberlain, framed this really well, I thought, when he said, we really want to double click on what recruitment 2.0 could look like, right? So like, we understand there are current barriers to recruitment for people with disabilities or accessible career entry. What can we do to change the way that that process is done? And what are some of the solutions around that? So that's the challenge that is currently active. And we would love submissions, just to put in a shameless plug here. We would love submissions from the NEADS community, from the disabled student community. So please share these with your networks. And we'll have lots of time for questions, Q&A at the end. And then the second challenge, so actually, let me back up for 1 second. So when we were first designing kind of the sequence of 4, the thing we landed on was kind of 4 different stages of the career, right? Because one of the barriers that came up most often when we went out to the community with those submissions, or for those submissions, is attitudinal bias, understandably, right? People were saying there's bias in the way that we're looked at by employers, which is true. But if we had one challenge focused on attitudinal bias, like it impacts every part of everything else, right? So we didn't want to focus each challenge on a specific barrier. And instead, we decided to focus them on a different stage of kind of career development, or at least points on the career journey. So the first one is about access to work. The second one is about support at work. So things like accommodations in the workplace, accessible technology being accessible in workplaces. And it's important to note here that it's not just about large workplaces like CIBC, because we have large accommodation budgets, for example. But what are the solutions out there that small and medium-sized enterprises that often struggle to hire people with disabilities or are scared to do so because of the cost? What are the innovative solutions we can bring into their space? And one other point on this challenge, it's also about workplace culture, right? Because if you don't have an inclusive culture, it doesn't matter how many screen readers and ramps and elevators you have, but if you don't feel welcomed at the workplace, you're not going to have a positive work experience. So it's also identifying what are the barriers in creating a workplace culture. And just one of the examples that I'll give here that from our submissions that I thought was really good was one of the people pointed out that transportation is a big thing because they're unable to go with their colleagues to get a beer after work, for example, right? Because they have pre-scheduled times and things like that. And, you know, that is a big part of workplace culture, right? The ability to socialize with your teammates, with your team, with your company. So that's going to be the focus of the second challenge, which will hopefully, all being well, launch in December of 2021. So in about half a year or so, for International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Please don't hold me to that timeline, because if COVID has taught us anything, it's that things can change, but that's at least the initial plan. And then the third challenge will be around career advancement. And this is a really big one for me, because I've always thought that when you talk about disability employment, a lot of people, and not everybody obviously, but a lot of people think that, once you get disabled people into an organization, entry level roles, that kind of thing, job done. And the reality is, we all know it's not job done. Yes, that's a critically important step and should not be ignored. And that's why it's our challenge number one. But in terms of challenge number three, career advancement is just as important. And having people with disabilities feel empowered to climb within organizations, no matter how big or robust those organizations are also really important. And I think this is a barrier that, or a set of barriers that doesn't get talked about a lot, right? I wrote an article on LinkedIn several years ago when I first joined CIBC called "Let's Turn the Corporate Ladder into a Ramp." And the idea of that article was just to say, they say a corporate ladder is the metaphor, but is it? Because how many people with, physical disabilities, for example, do you see at the senior executive level of companies, right? Not very many. And yes, that is changing, and it's important to recognize that it's changing. But the career advancement is really, really important. And so that's going to be the focus of our third challenge. And then our fourth challenge, which keep in mind is right now about 3.5 years away. So again, things can change significantly, but we're planning to do something on the future of work. And this really came out of COVID, to be honest, and it came out of how things are changing. And so this challenge is really about what are some of the ideas that we may have seen in some of the other challenges that we want to dive deeper on, or what are some of the kind of transformational elements that we've seen come out of COVID that we can highlight for people with disabilities and changing the way that disability is perceived. And so it's really important so for us to kind of focus on that as well. And one of my hopes with that fourth challenge, and this is particularly relevant for the NEADS community, is, I'd love to hear from the next generation, right? From the up and coming students, from the current coordinators of the disability awareness centers on campuses across the country as to what they're hearing from their students. And so that, that is going to be present in all four of the challenges, but particularly that future work challenge, I think, is a really unique opportunity to kind of shape things overall. So if we go to the next slide, and pardon me, I'm just going to take a quick drink of water here so I don't run out of air. So I wanted to dive a little deeper on the access to work challenge. So this is, as I mentioned, the first challenge, the one that we launched on May 20th. So at a very high level, this challenge is about just that, access to work. So any solutions, any ideas that you have around career entry for people with disabilities. So for some people, that could be, as I mentioned in a previous example, transportation, right? Getting to work, being able to have the ability to get to work on time. That could be access to technology if you're working remotely. That could be recruitment processes that are inaccessible. It could be the automated AI screening processes that have, that identify large gaps in resumes. And for a lot of people with disabilities, myself included, we have those large gaps in resumes because of systemic barriers that we've encountered, right? And so it's solutions around that. And really, one of the things that came up most often in, when we were doing the discovery challenges, we called it, where we went out to the community for barriers, is a lot of people are very frustrated by the one-size-fits-all recruitment, right? That doesn't take into account unique experiences and also questions around disclosure of disability. Just to share a very quick personal story, I consider myself lucky in the sense that my disability is very obvious, right? And so I've never really had a question around disclosure. But I did have one situation when I was job searching where I didn't disclose my disability in the cover letter. because it wasn't relevant to the job. And then they called me for an interview. They were all excited. They said, "We'd love to bring you in." I said, "Okay." And at that point, I did have to disclose my disability because I needed to make sure that the interview location was going to be wheelchair accessible. So I said, "Oh, by the way, I have cerebral palsy. I'm in a power wheelchair." And they got very awkward very quickly and hung up the phone. And that interview offer was rescinded. So this stuff still does happen and has happened to me and to many other people I know, particularly people with non-visible disabilities encounter questions around disclosure. And so that's another area that we're really hoping we see some great solutions for or from in this challenge. So if we go to the next slide. So what does this get you? So I always start with saying there is money attached to this. I sound a bit like a game show host when I go through this part, but I don't want to be like, you could win $50,000, because that's not really what it's about. But what we recognize is that many of these solutions need help getting off the ground, right? And we need, and when I say we, I mean CIBC, and lucky enough to be partnering with a great organization like MaRS, recognize that we need to invest in this community. And this is one of the ways that we're investing in this community is by creating a prize pool for solutions that make a difference to our community. And so for each of the challenges, we will have, as you see there on the screen, or for those that can't see, sorry, that wasn't very accessible to me. For those that can't see, it's a first place prize of $50,000, 2 runner-up prizes of $20,000 each, and 2 honorable mention prizes of $5,000, for a total prize pool per challenge of $100,000. That funding is meant to grow those solutions, whatever they are, whether they're in the recruitment space, in the access to technology space, in the transportation space. But in addition to that, we're going to also be providing to all winners some support, both MaRS and CIBC, and we partnered with a great organization called Access to Success, who have a social innovation incubator and accelerator for the disability community. We're putting together a package of programming and workshops to support the winners to bring their ideas to life. And that's very, very exciting. And to be clear, you guys are getting a bit of a sneak peek here because we don't exactly know what that's going to look like. That's still being developed. But we're really excited because we want these ideas not just to be presented and done and then we give you the money and kind of you go off and do it, but also it's really important to us to build a community, right? And to build change makers and to inspire, as I mentioned many times now, the next generation of change makers. So what are the timelines here? So the challenge is now open. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how you can submit, and feel free to ask any questions on that. The submission deadline is June 30th, so it opened May 20th, closing June 30th. We've already had a lot of expressions of interest, but we would love more. There's so many great ideas out there in the disability community. And from being a member of NEADS and attending NEADS conferences myself, I know there's some great ideas that get discussed within NEADS and on the listserv and various parts of what your organization does. And so really hoping we can promote this to your members, and very excited. So, but the submission deadline is June 30th. And it was also really important to me that submissions could be made in any way, right? So we can accept them in email, we can do video or audio submissions if that's more accessible for you. We could do phone calls and then we help you craft the submission. If you're really into postage stamps, you can do snail mail. You can do any kind of way of submitting. We want to make sure it's as accessible. And if you go to the website, which I'll talk about in a minute, if you go to the website and find something that's not accessible, please let us know, because we'll work with you. It doesn't matter what it is. I always tell people, and this is some of my disability humor coming in. I always tell people I am flexible, just not physically. And so really happy to support in any way. And I know MaRS feels the same way. So we go to the second to last slide. So what are your next steps and how do you get involved? And obviously we'll have a lot of time for questions. But for more information, you can go to challenges.marsdd.com, and there you'll find a link to the Access to Work CIBC MaRS Innovation Challenge. And on that page, there are submission guidelines. You can also, if you're a big fan of social media, you can also follow MaRS-DD on Twitter, and we'll be putting out details there, as well as call for submissions. And then you see there an email address, challenges@marsdd.com, or a phone number as well, which I won't read out loud just in case anyone, in case there's privacy issues. But yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, our big thing is we want the community to get involved here, right? I'll just share one final story and then happy to open up for questions. When they were first talking to me about joining the inclusion and diversity team and leading some of this work at CIBC, I had two stipulations. My first was, let's be innovative, and I've already talked a lot about that, and I was very fortunate that they agreed with that. My second was, please, please, please have someone with a disability leading this, or involved in the leadership team. Now, I wasn't on that team at the time, and I didn't know, I swear I didn't know that they were looking at me the whole time anyway, for the role. But it was really important for me, and it's always been really important for me at CIBC to approach this in a really authentic way. So we want to hear your ideas. We want the community to get excited about this, and coming to events like this and spreading this through great organizations like NEADS and through your network and to all the campus groups, I think is what's going to get us there. So I'm going to mercifully stop talking, so you can stop listening to my voice for a couple minutes, but I'm more than happy to take any questions, or we still have about 20-25 minutes, so I'm more than happy to take any questions or just have a conversation. So Frank, I don't know if you usually put hands up or how it's done on Zoom. I'm more used to Microsoft Teams, but however you want to lead this, Frank.
Right. First of all, I'd like to say, Tim, that was a fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed it, and it's a really exciting and innovative inclusive design challenge that you've launched. Nice to see that level of innovation in the private sector being led by a person with a disability with lived experience in your role. So I think what we can do now is people can put their hands up, or they can put a comment in the chat, and we can also just ask people to unmute themselves and speak. But maybe we'll start with the hands up or a comment in the chat, and go from there.
Great.
One person at a time. Any comments? Any questions?
You guys are an easy crowd. Although Katie's heard me give that spiel way too many times, so but
I think it's really exciting the amount of funding actually that you're providing with this, because I know there are lots of initiatives that are I won't say similar, but are in this vein where the it's people are volunteering entirely their time to present something that takes a lot of time and effort to create with no possibility of any kind of compensation, remuneration, or training and support to carry the initiative forward. So I think that's another thing about it that is very attractive. Certainly will result in more entries and more innovation.
Yeah, well, and just on that point, Frank, and I completely agree with you. Often the disability community is asked to give their expertise for free, right? And that's been a really long-standing thing in our community. And so it was really important for me, if I was going to come about this in the right way, to make sure that we're supporting the ideas financially as well. And that doesn't just mean the prize money, but also things like connecting them with CIBC's innovation banking team or business banking team, and supporting them to grow their ideas, whether it be through loans or access to credit or whatever else. So we're working on exactly what that's going to look like. And I see a comment in the chat, I believe from Celine, around how you submit your thing for the website. So that's a great question. And so basically, if you go to the MaRS-CIBC Challen website and go to the Access to Work Challenge, you scroll down, there's a submission button, and you do have to register for an account with the MaRS, what's the word I'm looking for? Innovation Challenges site. And then you can submit there. And I'm looking at Katie Ross, my colleague from MaRS, who might be able to jump in and provide a couple more details. Katie, do you mind jumping in here?
Of course. Well, first I want to say thank you so much for speaking, Tim. Thank you, Frank, for allowing me to attend. This was fantastic. And it's really great that we're spreading the word, and NEADS is a great organization. Celine, in regards to your question, just like Tim said, I just created an answer here in the chat so I can send it. But if you go to our Access to Work webpage on the MaRS-DD website, there is a blue button. If you scroll down a little bit, it says Accept Challenge, and it'll be prompted to create an account for this challenge, and you will submit your submission by filling out our submission form, which is a few questions just regarding what your solution may be, and you're able to upload your solution to the website. There is also a step-by-step process on the same page on a tab that says How to Apply. That gives you 3 options on how to apply. The first is through the website. The second is through sending your submission to our email, which Tim read out earlier. And the third is to directly mail your submissions, but I can post the link directly in the chat right now, and you can view how to submit your solutions through our website there. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, let me know.
Thank you. The other thing that I'll commit to doing too after the event is I'll send a communication. I'll BCC everyone who attended, including some people who registered, but for whatever reason weren't able to attend, so that they had that information in an email with all the appropriate links. I just want to say one other thing, and I really don't want to be dominating this conversation, but on the subject of volunteering, we're talking about, Tim, you were raising the issue about people with disabilities being asked to volunteer all the time and expected to. I think that also applies to the labor market too. So there's this sense that somehow people, and there are a lot of programs that are set up where people with disabilities are being asked to give up their time and their expertise, which otherwise might be paid employment, but it's set up as a volunteer opportunity with the, and it's advertised as something that, it's good for you, you should volunteer. I mean, everybody should volunteer in their lives for different organizations, but if the expectation is the value of people with disabilities is as it has been in the past and still to some extent today, is measured differently and is measured as that people with disabilities can get involved with things and not be properly compensated or compensated at all. for their contributions, that's a problem, right?
Well, and I also think, Frank, just to add to what you're saying, one of the conversations that really kind of bugs me personally is the conversation around wage subsidies, right? Because what you're often saying is people with disabilities are only worth taking on as employees if we get some coverage of their wage, which really paints a pretty negative picture off the start. And so what we're looking to do in this innovative challenge is how can we support companies that may need wage subsidy because they're small organizations, but do it in more innovative, inclusive ways. And I think your point around volunteering is really important. And so, yeah, that's a big thing. And I think I'm so fortunate and lucky to have landed in a role in corporate Canada. By the way, how I ended up with a human rights degree working at a bank, I'll never know. But there you go. So don't think that you can't work at a bank depending on or whatever your degree is, because we have roles for everybody. But for me, being able to lead something like this it's important to me, not only professionally, but it means something to me personally. And that's why I've thrown myself into this project, as Katie knows, sometimes to MaRS's cost. I've thrown myself in head first here because it really does mean something to me personally. Any other questions or comments or problems with anything I've said, or interesting facts about ducks? I don't know. Anything?
We know you're always a guy who has all his ducks in a row.
Well, thank
will
you.
say that.
I was waiting for that pun, but Alan, I see.
Alan has a comment or a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask in terms of I also posted this in the chat, but I probably missed it. But I guess I'm wondering about the implementation part of it in terms of, like, I guess when you're looking at the proposals, like, I guess especially being maybe technologically inclined, like what level of like detail or information or otherwise are you looking for, and sort of, can you give me an idea of where that has to be at the beginning and where that should be by like the end of sort of what you're looking to do, those sorts of things? Is that something you can give me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really, we didn't want to put too many parameters on it, right? We didn't want to say had to be this certain level of detail, because we recognize that some projects won't have that much detail, right? Some of them will be very much startup ideas, or just an idea, or just a concept that they're looking to build and need support in order to build. So we didn't want to put any parameters, but the kind of general rule is as much detail as you can give us and as much sense as you can give us as to how this problem, or sorry, how this solution is going to positively make an impact. That's really what we're looking for. We're not judging based on any technical criteria. We're more judging on the impact and the possibility of that impact to kind of flourish were it to be one of the winning solutions. So does that answer your question? You can say no.
Yeah, I think it does. Like, I think like, as you say, I think it's very vague, but I think that's intentional, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it, we had a lot of discussions around how much, how many restrictions or parameters to put on this, and it really came down to, because it's the first year we're doing this too, and this is very unique for a bank to be doing, right? Like, I'll be honest, when I go out to my colleagues at other banks and talk about this project, they're kind of confused because it's a bit of an interesting way for us as a sponsor and as a funder to approach it. So it's really about just kind of putting as much in the hand of the submitter as we can, and seeing what that is. But if you start to put together a submission and want to have a chat about it, that's why we put our email address and our phone number on the slide, and will be in the recording, because we'd love to just have a chat. We like talking to people, and so happy to kind of talk through with you, to make sure you're happy with the solution you're submitting and how you're submitting it.
I have a question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you consider this particular CIBC MaRS Inclusive Design Challenge focusing on access to work with respect to the Accessible Canada Act and the fact that the federal government and federally regulated companies and entities, including banking sector, are required to meet the obligations under the ACA. And I'm thinking about this too, realizing that many government departments and private sector companies are reaching out to organizations like ours and saying, we're committing to hiring X number of people with disabilities. In the case of the federal government, several thousand through the federal public service over a certain period of time.
Yeah.
How can we do this? How can we recruit qualified people with disabilities and bring them into our workplaces, and at all levels too, at entry levels all the way up in some cases, depending on the degree or the experience. So how would you say that this challenge situates within the requirements of the ACA?
It's a great question, Frank, and I'm going to give kind of a high concept answer to start, and then I'll drill down a little bit. But, I think one of the things about the Accessible Canada Act is that I've thought since it was announced, is that the time for innovation in the disability space is now, right? The government is paying attention to it. We now have a federal minister for disability inclusion, Carla Quattro, which we never had before. And so there's a lot happening in this space. And we as a bank are trying to figure out, what our reporting requirements are going to be, right? And I'll be honest, in my previous role at CIBC, I worked in regulatory compliance. So I was the one that was there when the Accessible Canada Act first got announced. And I brought it to my team at the bank and said, oh, guys, we're going to have this federal accessibility legislation to deal with in a few years. And their faces, they're just like, what? Like, what do we do? And I said, well, that's why we need to figure it out. And I think this is one of the ways that CIBC is engaging it, right? Like this is on the community investment side, but we also have teams working. Our director of client accessibility, Catherine Braken, is currently working on kind of the client side of it and making sure we're going to be meeting our obligations there. And so I think it's a really important question, is how this all fits together. And I think my answer is that, the time to kind of talk about accessibility is now. It's such an exciting time for all of us that have been working in this space for many years. And Frank, we've known each other since 2004. And I think 16, 17 years ago, we wouldn't have thought, God, am I that old? We wouldn't have thought that we'd be here now. And so I think, it's going to be a challenge for all organizations, CIBC and MaRS included, but this is a really big piece of that, is bringing innovation into this space, because the old ways of doing things maybe aren't moving the needle fast enough. And I don't think that's saying anything too controversial.
I think the time has come too where employers can no longer say, we'd like to hire more people with disabilities, but they're not applying. We don't have enough people applying, or they're not qualified, those people who are applying, when in fact we know, like right now, there are over 200,000 people with disabilities in public post-secondary education, and graduating quickly and leaving college or university with lots of skills and credentials. So if the time has come for employers not to
Well, and it's really important to, and you're absolutely right, Frank, and it's really important to, you know, recognize that a lot of those people that are graduating now and then graduating in the next couple of years are very high potential candidates, right? These are the people, and you know, as I mentioned at the start of my presentation, I did not think I would be unemployed for 4 years coming out of school, right? I had had a successful career at Carleton. I was involved in a number of committees, and then University of Nottingham, same thing. And coming home and just getting door after door shut. I believe my count was 108 applications without an interview. And you know, and so I think you're seeing so many high potential candidates that you're absolutely right. Employers can no longer say we can't find them, and they also can no longer say we don't know how to do it, because the reality is they're going to have to know how to do it, and bringing innovation and innovative ideas into the space will help.
Can I ask a quick question about that in terms of, like, I guess when you're looking at the challenge, are you looking from just the individual's perspective, or are you also looking for submissions around like better HR processes and
Yeah.
systems and that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, so we're looking both. It's a great question, Alan, and thank you for it. We're looking both on an individual level, but also on a systemic level. If you've got a great idea on how to reshape the, you know, recruitment processes or programs that get used, if you've got a great idea on how to reshape LinkedIn, we'll take it. Not that I'm going to be able to go to LinkedIn and say, change everything. I'm not that well connected yet, but you know, we are looking at both the individual and systemic level. And actually, if anyone has an opportunity to go and read the research report, and Katie, maybe I can ask you to put a link to that research report in the chat. That would be great, because I'm really proud of that research report, to be honest. You know, we talk about that some of the barriers are individual and some of the barriers are systemic, and more kind of system-wide. And so we want to capture all of that.
Fantastic.
Great. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask if anyone has any final burning questions. And if not, maybe I'll just thank NEADS so much, and thank Katie so much for jumping in, and particularly Frank. It's always great to work with you, Frank. It's been 17 years and we're not slowing down yet. So no, I'm really happy to be reconnected with NEADS. And if anyone has any questions, you know, you can reach out to us through the MaRS email address, but you can also add me to LinkedIn, and to Tim Rose. If anyone's on LinkedIn, you can find me there. And so always happy to have these conversations. And thank you so much for inviting me to this, to have this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and thank you. It's Katie or Catherine, which do you prefer?
It's Katie.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Very much for joining us today, and we will
Thank you for
also
having me.
continue to promote the challenge on our social media and on our website. We're recording the event today. It'll go up on our YouTube channel too. I think this has been a fantastic NEADS community engagement event, and look for other events to be announced over the next few days. We're going to have a couple more events before the end of June. I'll leave the subject matter as a bit of a surprise, and let you read the announcements when the events are publicly available, launched. Yeah, so any other further questions before we end this NEADS community engagement event? Ann Turner, I think, has a question.
I just wanted to say that I I put a comment down there about what I'm happy is that the new generation of students who are graduating with disabilities, that they know that they have choices about how they can be accommodated in pursuing their future employment versus students of my age level who did not have a lot of these accommodations. They didn't know exactly what they could ask for. And that's in my view, I feel that they're very, very fortunate.
Great.
And I mean, I talked about that in my book and all that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Again, I really appreciate it, and really excited to bring NEADS and the MaRS-CIBC Inclusive Design Challenge together, and hopefully get some great solutions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending too.
Thank
Take
you
care.
so much, Frank.
Bye.
Have a
Take
good
care,
one.
everyone.